Okay, I think we'll start. So thanks very much for joining us today. We're thrilled to be able to welcome you to Responsible Disruption and our second Innovation Table Zoomcast. My name's James Gamage and I'm the Director of Innovation and the Social Impact Lab at the United Way of Calgary and area.
And I'm Monique Blau, Director of Strategy and Design in the lab and at J5, a Calgary-based innovation and design firm. We're excited to welcome our guests and to discuss creating a culture of possibility. So just before we get started today, a couple of things we'd like to cover. The first is we are recording today's session. And so if you want to share it with your colleagues or friends, we'll be sending a follow-up link in the next couple of days. And you'll also be able to find the recording on our YouTube channel. Our next Innovation Table episode will take place next week on April 22nd at 2 p.m. The session will be entitled An Indigenous Perspective on the COVID-19 Health Crisis, and will take the approach of a virtual talking circle. For today's agenda, we'll be going through some introductions, we'll have a moment of silence, and we've taken a different approach where we'll be doing breakout rooms. So just prior to that, Bina will do an introduction to that breakout exercise. Everyone will come back and we'll do some feedback. And now what with Bina and our close. I'd also like to ask that if you have questions along the way, to please use the chat function in the bottom of your Zoom panel. And we'll be collecting these throughout our session today and hopefully answer all of them as much as possible during the session. Lastly, because we'll be using breakout rooms, our team in the background is going to be moving everyone virtually. You'll see a pop-up on your screen that will ask you to move to the breakout room. Please action that move. So just before we get started, why don't we tell you a little bit about the lab? So the Social Impact Lab is a partnership between J5 and the United Way of Calgary and area. In the lab, we address issues that matter to Calgarians. We look at issues that affect all the citizens in our city, such as poverty, children and youth mental health, and community well-being. We all know that our social ecosystem is being disrupted, and there is constant demand for new ideas, solutions, products, and services. And this demand continues to outpace what we see as available funding and services. So we in the lab are responding to this disruption by investing in strategic partnerships that support our social ecosystem. That helps us not only to serve our citizens, but to truly solve some of these complex social issues. Over to you, James.
Thanks, Monique. So if we can flip to the new slide, please. So the Social Impact Lab is creating a platform called Responsible Disruption. So responsible disruption is about being aware that we don't want to create disruption for the sake of disruption. We want change to systems, models, and people to be fair, considered, and compelling so that it has the greatest impact on the places in which we live. So we're now almost 5 weeks into the COVID-19 health crisis and the lockdown that has had a huge impact on everyone in Alberta and across the world. Literally overnight, everything has changed, from the way that we buy our groceries to the way that we live family life. Businesses have had to rethink everything about their operation and service delivery. And longer term, this will have a profound impact on the local, national, and global systems in which we operate. The United Way Social Impact Lab was to convene a series of discussions about our response to what is going on right now in the province, how we build recovery at an individual, local, national and global level, and how we can build resilience going forward. So this week, we're delighted to be joined by Bina M. Patel. So Bina is CEO and founder of Saathi Impact Consulting, a collective good consulting firm focused on equity and inclusion. Bina has worked for over 20 years in government, non-profit and philanthropic sectors around the globe on advancing human rights and social justice. Next slide, please. So Bina's going to run an interactive session today entitled Creating a Culture of Possibility. How do we create possibility around the situation we find ourselves in today? And what actions can we take to make the possible probable? During the session, she's going to test the true power of Zoom by including a time for mindfulness, as well as breakout discussions and group feedback, as Monique just discussed. So Bina, welcome. The floor is yours.
Wonderful. Hello, everybody. Thank you for having me. I'm really excited to be with all of you today. See some of your faces and your names on the screen, so thank you again. I would want to start with an acknowledgement that I'm visiting you all from San Diego, California, the treated land of the Kumeyaay tribes, those who face the sea with the cliffs at their backs. So I'm excited to acknowledge that I'm on ancestral and current lands of Indigenous people. And my acknowledgement also comes with a responsibility to speak as compassionately and truthfully as I can to the work that we're here to do today. As a first step, what I really want us to focus on is, as you saw, a moment of mindfulness. With so much going on around us, families at home, I'm on Zoom calls with kids in the background and kids helping facilitate their parents during calls. The demands on us are massive and great. So before we get into this conversation together, I do want us to have a moment to breathe together, to get rooted and centered together, and to use our time to check in with ourselves. So to do that, our first step, I want you just to sit comfortably in your chairs, get rooted, wiggle in if you need, feet on the floor. Lower your eyes, or you can close your eyes if you're comfortable with that. And slowly breathe naturally. In and out, no rushed breaths. Just let your breath come as it may. And let's start with a physical check-in. We're going to start with the top of our heads. Feel that space at the top of your crown. And slowly begin to work your way down. Check in with your eyebrows. See if they're a little crunched up. Try to relax your forehead. Move down to your jaws, your cheeks. Maybe move your jaw around to relax your jawline, unclench your teeth. Drop your tongue down into the bottom of your mouth. Keep breathing naturally. Let's bring our attention down to our neck. See if it feels tight, a little out of whack. If it feels loose, no judgment. Observe how your neck is doing. Check in with your shoulders. Keep moving down. If you need to wiggle, move your shoulders up towards your ears and give them a heavy drop. Keep breathing. Bring your attention down to your rib cage and your chest, your heart space. Check in how you're feeling. And no judgment, just an observation. Now I'm going to ask you to breathe in a bit more deeply as you move your awareness down into your belly. Breathe more deeply, expand your rib cage. Check in with how your back is doing. If you need to wiggle a little bit. Observe how you're doing. Continue to take some deep, slow breaths. Feel your belly, your rib cage expand millimeter by millimeter, a little more than it did earlier. And bring your awareness down to your hips, how you're sitting in the chair. Down to your knees. Keep breathing deeply as you bring awareness down to your feet, your ankles. Now we're going to move into some mindfulness. I'm going to ask you to take a deep breath in for the count of 4, and then we'll hold it and we will release. So in, but through your nose for a count of 4. 1, 2, 3, 4, and hold. 2, 3, 4, out through your mouth. 2, 3, 4. Again, in. 2, 3, 4, hold. 2, 3, 4, and out. 2, 3, 4. And our last time, in. 2, 3, 4, hold. 2, 3, 4, and out. 2, 3, 4. Your last deep, big breath, really try to expand yourself. Breathe deep through your heart space. Feel your shoulders move back. You're sitting up taller into your belly. You're pushing against your belly. Get bigger and bigger as you breathe in. Then a loud, deep breath out. Great. Welcome back, everybody. Thank you. Hold that space. Take deep breaths. We still need to wiggle, get the energy moving, the air moving. So our first step in creating a culture of possibility is to embody it, is to use our physical and spiritual space as big as we can to really motivate our intellectual thinking, our emotional well-being, and our connection to each other. So one of the most critical parts about creating the culture of possibility is to use your bodies and to use them in a way that creates well-being for you and those around you. And one of the first steps is just breathing, figuring out where you're at and taking some deep breaths to get bigger. So as we developed this idea for this webinar today, I was really thinking about the moment we're in now. And as you heard, my background is in doing the work of equity, inclusion, and justice. So I work with organizations around the world thinking about how do you shift programming, operations, and structures to really do this. And what that requires is innovation, or what brings us here today, responsible disruption. And these ideas really come together around the central element that we have to be able to see a different path forward. We have to know that something different is possible than what we're starting with, than what we think the end game might be. But in fact, we can create a whole other future that's brighter and better than the one we've been given. So this idea of disruption, of innovation, of change is really about creating the conditions by which we can create a different future. And when I think about the word responsible, as you heard James introduce, the thing that really strikes me here is around responsible for who? What are we trying to do in our work of disruption and innovation? And the lens I come from is it's about the collective good. What we're here to do is to create pathways of new possibilities, another way of doing life. In fact, that lets us afford new opportunities, a way to thrive for communities and people that have largely been excluded from the systems of change, of economics, of politics, of well-being. And we're seeing that right now in the brightest light ever. The pandemic is really shining a light on structural inequities and what's possible in our systems and what's not. We're seeing this in both the worst and the best lights right now. So when I think about what responsible means in this space, it's about the collective good. It's about generating more inclusion and a bigger space of belonging. So what I want to share before we go into our Zoom groups is a little bit about what I'm seeing around what's possible and where it comes from, perhaps. So there's so many amazing things happening right now. I mean, we're seeing people connect with each other in amazing ways, technology showing up in new ways, certainly just a lot of things that are unfolding in real time. The first thing I need to acknowledge is that a lot of this is not new. While we're dealing with the effects of the pandemic and systems struggling to meet the current demand, these ideas of what's possible, the big thinking of a new future, has been handed down to us from our ancestors. I look to Indigenous peoples, to First Nation peoples, to our freedom fighters, civil rights movement, folks, human rights activists. For generations, they have been doing the work to ask, what comes next? What are we creating for future generations? What's possible that's better for my children? So the question isn't new. And in fact, some of the tools we're seeing, we've had in our toolkit all along. They're being amplified in this moment right now. So what I'm seeing around what's possible, that even in my work on racial equity and inclusion, I often got pushback on. The first one is suspending the rules of the game. So for example, in philanthropy, we're seeing all of a sudden, red tape and bureaucratic rules being suspended. No more reporting, general op grants going out the door quickly. We're seeing systems react overnight, which is amazing. These are things that the system could have done years ago, but right now in this pandemic, we're seeing it. So that's one thing. The second thing I think is most critical in this time of possibility is we're seeing the humans in each other. We're humanizing ourselves. We're letting ourselves have our backgrounds, for example, and not all the perfect lighting and not the perfect setup and tables and cats and children running around in front of us and behind us. We're letting ourselves check in. Here's one of the most amazing things I'm seeing. About every phone call in Zoom I've been on, someone says, well, how are you doing? And they pause. They wait for the response because we know the answer is right now, not just, oh, fine, busy. We know there's something more about how our hearts are doing, and we're creating space for individuals to show up. We're letting family life actually intersect with that work-life balance. It's a new way of seeing each other. More importantly, when we're centering the human, when we're seeing the human in this moment, the possibilities of how systems respond is amazing. We're starting to see like, oh, there's people in this equation of the healthcare system. And they matter. And in affordable housing, it's actually a person. So we're starting at a different place in terms of how we're humanizing our responses through organizations and individual interactions. Another one I'm seeing is around wellness as a precondition to action. We haven't gotten this one totally right yet because we're still really focused on productivity and like 7 hours of Zoom calls back to back. So bless you if you are the people who have to go through that. And if you are making your teams do that, stop doing that. Take a break, just turn off your cameras together for a few minutes. But what I'm seeing is this conversation around, you know, do what you need to take care of before you show up, right? We're understanding that wellness, mental health, emotional well-being are essential elements to taking care of business at hand, that we can't keep showing up in a dehumanized, kind of disassociated way, but in fact, these are all connected. So for the first time, I'm seeing commercials on the television to access mental health care, widespread all the time. I'm seeing folks check in with each other, free yoga classes. I do mindfulness sessions a lot, and most times before the pandemic, about half of the people in a room would roll their eyes at me and be like, oh, whatever. Some people would just stare at me when I asked them to close their eyes and take a deep breath, and they would be like, I see you, right? And so they just wouldn't go along with it. But there's this moment right now where we're understanding that these practices of breathing, of being active, of accessing the arts, of being with our families, of communication is about our wellness. And that when we take care of our well-being, it sustains our actions. The last thing is the soft skills, right? Those things of, oh, well, you should be a good communicator and have emotional intelligence and those sorts of things. So many of us have talked about that these are not soft skills, they're essential skills. These are the fundamental skills to lead transformative projects, strategies, long-term sustainable change for the communities that we want to serve. And so when I think about this moment, I'm coaching so many executives and teams and really thinking about how do you communicate over a screen? How do you tap into that emotional intelligence to really take in how people are doing? How do you facilitate when you've done a deep breathing exercise for your staff session and you see tears coming down someone's face? What do you do? Those skills right now are being called front and center as part of our work. And you see this even in our communities of how we're responding, that we're trying to pitch in and help. That so many of us understand that the antidote to this big question of helplessness in the face of a pandemic is, what can I do? How do I support myself, my family, my neighbors, my community, my colleagues? Those are the soft skills I'm seeing around what's possible. So these are a few of the things that I feel like, again, we knew these things. They've been circulating, but in the pandemic, all of a sudden they became thrust into the spotlight and essential elements of change. So when I think about what's possible, I think it's almost endless. We can create a new future here, and that's what we're here to do. So these are just a few of the thoughts. And as we go into the breakout, as you heard, we're going to test Zoom capabilities. So fingers crossed, and let us all take a moment of prayer to make this work. The Zoom setup will automatically put you in rooms. You'll press the button that says, yes, please send me there. And we'll come out of that Zoom room automatically. You'll have just under 10 minutes, about 8 minutes in these chats to talk about this question of, what are you seeing as possible? What are you picking up around you? What's possible right now? Maybe some of the things I've said, but really thinking about, as we're looking at past the pandemic, what's possible in the future we're all here to build. So you'll have time to discuss. Each of your rooms already has an assigned facilitator and note taker. So when we come back, that person who's been assigned to your rooms, they'll tell you who they are. When we come back, we're actually going to try to do a debrief. So I'm trying to recreate what we might do in person and share some of the thoughts that come from all of you. At that time, I'll encourage you also to put your thoughts into the chat box so that we can save them and others can see them if we don't have time for everyone to speak up. But we really want to capture that place you're tapping into when you breathe deeply and your heart space gets big and your belly gets big and you feel big. What's possible right now? What can we do for our communities? That's the question as we head into the Zoom rooms. Good, thumbs up, nod, excellent, great. All right, so Vicki and Cheryl are gonna do the Zoom magic, and I'll see you back here in about 8 minutes. Awesome. Like magic. This is amazing. Okay, let's do, I think everyone's back. Is that right? Let's see. I think we have a few more folks who are waiting to Zoom back in, so let's give them a moment. Wow. Possibilities. Look at that. It's incredible. Oh, wow. There's everybody. Wow. Amazing. It worked. You're all back. Yay. Wonderful. Good to see your faces again. Fantastic. I know that was probably pretty quick, but I hope you had a few minutes to get into discussion. And so here's what we're going to do. I'm going to go around and call on the folks that were your volunteers to get a piece of feedback. So what was one of the takeaways from that discussion? So I'll just call on folks in the order I have them listed here. And again, for all of the participants, feel free to message in the chat box to everyone if you have other thoughts you want to share that don't come up, just so we can have a separate conversation there also. Sound good? Great. So I'm going to start with, let's see, first on my list, and we'll have to unmute them, is going to be Krista to share a thought about what's back from your team.
Yeah, there was a really good discussion in our group around what I guess would be the human element. Really good thoughts around how could, moving forward, we maybe not capitalize, but we embrace this desire to have people in our communities seen as people, as not just essential workers, but people who deserve equitable access to all the things that are essential for a good life. The other piece that I thought like really also connected back to the human was talking about how we can start to think about in our workplace, where we may not normally ask the question, how can I help you? But where we can start to ask that much more. It's always more readily apparent to ask people that we may think of as a little bit more vulnerable, older people, you know, how can I be of help? But it's not always something that we think about in our workplace. And so that's kind of where we landed.
Great.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Fantastic. Okay, John. One sec, we're unmuting you. You're still muted. There we go. Great.
Okay. Well, thank you for everyone in the group. It was a great conversation. There was one, I guess, tagline that came out, which I thought was really wonderful. And it was, you know, really in the future, companies starting to think about for their employees, how do we create places where people belong versus fit in? And so I think, you know, starting to be that, whether that's a physical environment, a physical space, people were saying that in a lot of ways, they're feeling like in their own workspace where they have complete control over how they set up their offices, sometimes they're able to kind of be themselves or set up their environments to be able to be more personalized so that they can be their best self. Whereas when they go into their offices, it sometimes feels like they're not able to truly be themselves because the way the office is configured, or even maybe the way that people are showing up today doesn't necessarily allow for that. And then in terms of, you know, communities in the future, one of the ideas was that communities and people that manage communities, associations, you know, are going to have to be much more intentional about getting and making sure that people are able to be with their tribes, and because people will be more particular in the future about where and when they invest their time, particularly when they're in groups. And so I think putting more pressure on communities to be more purpose-driven and be better at articulating kind of the why and their just cause so that people want to belong.
Excellent. Great. Thank you. How about Gabrielle?
Hi. So our group had a really interesting discussion about how after this, we're going to know that we're capable of more. We've really seen that maybe we can do more than we thought we could before. And what can we do with that maybe new confidence in ourselves and those around us?
Mm-hmm.
We also had a really interesting discussion about how we have so much more context to the people that we're interacting with in our work lives, and we can see them more than just the person at the office. So that might mean more empathy or more connection in the future, and there's a lot of power in that as well.
Amazing. Great. Thank you.
Thank you.
Jackie.
Hi, everyone. We had a great discussion in our group, and some themes that jumped out that people talked about was the fact that we can, when pressed, remove layers of bureaucracy, adapt quickly, and be flexible. And people talked about some examples about how systems, big, large systems, can be flexible and can change rapidly when pressed to do so. So that was a big theme. We talked about that shift from scarcity to abundance, growth in empathy, the idea that we're moving away from I to we now, because we see how interdependent with this virus we actually really are. We talked about, what do we see beyond the pandemic? The idea that we would be able to collaborate, share data more quickly, more easily to help build healthier communities. And, the pandemic has removed that bureaucracy and those barriers. Mm-hmm. We kind of ended our conversation about talking a bit about our own communities and the fact that really, do we need a gym? There's lots of walking in our communities, and that's what we've all had to do, and look at the positive impact it's had for our environment, because we are all driving less over the last month and 6 weeks. And so how can we sustain and continue on some of those positive changes that we've had as a result of all of this? Mm-hmm. Anyway, it was a great discussion, very uplifting.
Thank you. James.
Yeah, we had a great discussion as well. A couple of things that stood out. Jackie just mentioned about bureaucracy, and I think that was a theme in a couple of the points that were made around, removing the barriers between services and information sharing between services in the community has been a theme. So, red tape has gone, and we've just got the job done. Also thinking about, things that were hitherto not thought possible around crisis response dollars and how those have been freed up very easily. And maybe there's a different model there going forward around our social support mechanisms. And finally, new models of working. So, those in the corporate world, and well, everybody has been thrown into a new model of working. And I think it's really brought the focus on good leadership. You talked about sort of checking in with your team, caring, empathy, some really strong leadership traits which weren't hitherto valued as much as they might be now. So hopefully, going forward, that there's an opportunity to focus on some of those leadership traits as well. So that was a really good discussion.
Great, thank you, James. And Monique.
Yeah, like everyone, we also had a really great discussion. I think the group I was with, but we, I think, ended up in the same place, very similar, but we definitely followed the line of how do we create a greater sense of community? And, what can we do to continue to take action and to mobilize around the common good? Not, being very mindful and remembering the people that are suffering the most today. And one of our participants said, we're all suffering differently, but remembering this experience today will help us take action for what we need to do when we go back to what is quote unquote normal. Mm-hmm. And so taking responsibility for those actions and being mindful of them.
Excellent. Great. Thank you all. Amazing. And I see some great comments here, also in our chat box around political engagement and the flow of information, around kind of civic engagement and what supports public interest. So this is amazing. Here's my charge to you. Since you're all here, you signed up for this. So the question is not if, it's how. So what I'd like to just share a couple of thoughts based on what I hear is this piece of how do we move from what's possible to what's probable, right? So any of these things that we've come up with at one point were impossible. I promise you, philanthropic folks I worked with were like, it's impossible to give more general operating funds in 1 week. There is no way we can do that. We have a 6-month process. And yet, bam, some of them are doing it. So our work here is actually first to imagine the possibilities, to think about what does it take to create these conditions of connection, of humanity, of new leadership, of redesigning the infrastructure of our communities, of supporting civic engagement and action, of bringing down the barriers of access to information. That's a huge one, right? Information is power. So how do we move power? All of these different things that your teams talked about. How do we bring the human element back into the workplace, which is one of the most important tools of wellness, is that you get to be whole. You get to be who you are in the places you be. Like that's really important, that at work, you're not just a title, and then back outside of work, you get to be the real person, right? Trying to bring wholeness to that is an essential element to bringing wellness to our communities. So a lot of the ideas you brought up, what I want to offer to you is that our work here is, as you said, when we get back to normal, which I think our first thing is, what do we want to bring back? What do we want to make most possible and probable? And what is our role in that? So what I would offer to you is maybe to ask this question to your own colleagues and teams, the folks you work with, the peer organizations. What are we seeing as possible? And what do we want to hold on to make it probable? What I really wonder about in terms of those of us that are in this sector of creating change for the collective good, that really think about this question of what are we trying to be of service to? What I'm most concerned about right now is when there are these markers that go up of this is over. So whether it's the reopening of business or the shifts in social distancing policies, kind of all of those things, what are we going to say? Those of us who have been the holders of what is possible and the agents, the active agents of making that probable, what are we going to say about going back to the normal or about creating this new space? And so what I would really want you to think about is, how do you open this conversation up to your colleagues? How do we think about limiting these barriers that we're seeing right now coming down in some places, but not everywhere? How do we really think about being those people to hold this new future, to be big and expansive in a time when going back to normal is going to be where the energy is at, right? Everyone wants to go back to that. Like, get kids back in school, let me go back to the way it was. Like, I wonder, will we take those walks in the neighborhood and wave to all of our neighbors who are on the porch? I don't know. Are we going to go back to the bureaucracy? Are we going to go back to withholding information so that we keep people in certain boxes? I'm really curious to know about what comes out of this moment, but I also see this as a call to action right now, that we don't miss these moments of what's possible and how we've made them probable, the conditions by which we've already made them real, and how do we grow that into the future. So I have that homework for you. Talk to your colleagues, talk to your family, keep a running list, and really reflect on yourself as the person to make it probable. What can I do consistently to make this grow, to nourish this moment in a way that the things that are most helpful when we see the human in the middle of crisis, in the middle of massive systems, when we see the human, we realize we can do better. The story I keep coming back to is the stories I'm hearing about people who have been incarcerated, who have recently been set free. The liberation of folks who have been held on small bonds and bail funds, and they're out. And I thought, wow, this has been told as one of the most complex, scary stories ever. How can you let people out of jail? And all of a sudden, we've let them out. because there's a pandemic. And I really think about what is it that we need to learn from this moment, that when we humanize this moment, we see a whole new world out there. And what does it take for us to sustain that into the future, right? These conditions of wellness, of humanity, and so many other things that your teams, your families will unlock in coming weeks and months. We're going to learn about really trying to figure out how do we put this into normal work, normal life? How do we normalize the most essential and greatest parts of this moment and not lose them? So how do we move from what's possible to what's probable? And so that's our homework. That's my part of this today. But I need to take a deep breath because I feel like I just processed a lot of information with all of you on what you said and what you're writing. And so before I turn it back over, I just want us to take a deep breath. So I'm going to ask you again just to sit back in your chairs, drop your shoulders back, big heart space. And as you take a deep breath in, I want you to think of your commitment just from what you heard. Not a huge thing, something you're connecting to that says, yes, I can do that. I am the one. So take a deep breath in and say to yourself, I am the one who, fill in the blank. Breathe that thought all the way into your heart space. I am the one who, breathe it deep into your belly. I am the one. Feel it all the way to your fingertips. Great, thank you. So with that, my little part here is done, and I'm going to turn it over to Monique to kind of close out our webinar and share some last thoughts. And I just want to say thank you so much for the opportunity to share some thoughts with you and for what you all gave here and to each other. So good to see your faces. Thank you.
Well, thanks, Bina. I have so many closing thoughts, and I'm sure everyone is left with many moments, but I really love the idea that I'm going to not only learn from these, but I think it's about what can I do to sustain these moments. So thank you for that. I want to thank all of our attendees today for participating in this interactive session with our guest, Bina Patel. And also to be reminded that this is an opportunity to embrace a culture of possibility. We have the opportunity to create that path forward, and also that wellness is a path to leading our teams and taking care of our businesses and organizations. So thank you, Bina. We've also recorded this, so just a reminder, you will be getting an email with the link. You can also find it on our YouTube channel. I'd also like to thank our technical experts that are behind the scenes, Vicky Laszlo and Cheryl Condren. Thanks so much to both of you. And if you enjoyed today's sessions and would like to continue to participate in responsible disruption, we host these weekly on Wednesdays and next week on April 22nd at 2 p.m. Again, our focus is going to be on the Indigenous perspective on the COVID-19 health crisis, where we'll be holding a virtual talking circle. So Bina, again, tremendous gratitude for your engagement with us today. If you have questions that you'd still like to put in the chat, please feel free to do so. And we will try to get back to you on any of those, but we have a few extra moments. I might leave that open.
Yeah, go drink some water in these last minutes. Take a break, go to the bathroom, take care of yourselves in the extra few minutes we have.
Awesome. So lastly, if you'd like to continue to engage with the Social Impact Lab, you can find us on OpenCity, which is a digital engagement platform where we continue to have discussions around the key social issues that are affecting the citizens in this city. Also, you can find us on Instagram and Facebook and LinkedIn. So we hope to continue to engage with you and hope to see you again soon. Stay safe and be healthy, everyone.